Mr. Secretary, thank you so much for being back with us. I know last time we spoke, that number of stranded seafarers was higher, I think. Has it come down at all? Is 20,000 about right? And how are these individuals doing?
No, 20,000 is about right. And of course, there's been very little movement around the Strait of Hormuz. So we're still very concerned with the health and the well-being of these seafarers. The longer that this conflict continues, the more that the stress and fatigue starts to kick in. Also, the supplies on the ships. And this is one of the areas where they're really working with the littoral states in the Persian Gulf in order to, at least with all the challenges that exist right now, to provide those essential goods that the seafarers and the ships need in order to stay safe.
Can I ask a really dumb question? Why can't they just go into port? Why can't they find safe harbors to go into? Why do they have to stay on the water? Is it a permitting issue? Is it a size issue? Why can't they come in?
We're talking about nearly or around 2,000 vessels. And of course, that there's not enough capacity for all these vessels in the ports in the area, as well as the fact that even some of those port facilities may be targeted as well. And the reality is that there will not be space for all those ships to dock at the same time. There's also not a possibility to carry out crew changes right now, a very limited one, particularly because there are other disruptions, including air transportation. Plus, it will be very difficult to actually have volunteer seafarers that would like to go and move into a ship that is still in a conflict area. And I wouldn't blame any seafarers not wanting to go there.
Yeah, it's not safe or even viable to swap out the crews. I mean, I guess that makes sense. So what do you do? Is the UN working on an evacuation plan? Are you trying to coordinate with these countries? Because at the start of this, when we first started speaking, these ships were going on voyages that were going to take a little bit of time. So they did have some supplies, but they have to be running low by now. And I would imagine this is getting pretty urgent that you need to either get those ships moving or get those seafarers out of there.
Oh, that's correct. And that's why de-escalation, it's the main message that I will maintain, because that would allow us to continue to go back to the trade as we know it in the Strait of Hormuz. The reality right now is that we're very grateful to the countries in the region that they continue to provide with the challenges some supplies to these vessels for the seafarers to keep going. That's also the fact that even remotely, the companies, the ship owners and ship operators, as well as the countries are providing that assistance in order to address mental health and fatigue and making the communications between the seafarers and their families just to keep them informed as well. And we are getting information and stories from the seafarers of the ordeal that they're actually experiencing there.
I've seen some of them calling into some of our sister competing networks. Some of the captains have been doing some interviews. But, I mean, I would imagine that's difficult, too. Communications aren't incredibly reliable when you're on that kind of vessel. Are you doing anything? Last time you said you were concerned about their mental health. Is there anything being done? Are there people they can talk to through their companies, or are they just trying to hang in there until they can get home and see their loved ones?
No, there are actions that the companies and the countries are taking on board with this. There are some countries that have installed and established helplines 24/7 for the seafarers to have that communications. Other companies are providing that expertise remotely as well for the seafarers. What we're also doing on behalf of the member states at the IMO is, as last week, during the extraordinary session of the Council, we agreed to move forward in establishing an evacuation mechanism or a corridor in order to start allowing those ships to sail through the Strait of Hormuz. And it's one of those diplomatic conversations and negotiations that I'm starting to carry out, particularly with all the countries involved in the region.
How would that work? Can you give us any details of how that evacuation humanitarian corridor would work? Because you would, in theory, need to get Iran's sign-on for that, correct?
Oh, absolutely. And it's one of the first countries that I'm starting the conversations with, together with all the other countries in the region and countries beyond the region, because the reality is that this conflict, and by bringing shipping to a standstill, it's affecting us all globally. So right now, the first steps is, of course, how we're going to bring the parties together in order to allow us to follow through with the decision at IMO last week. We can carry out the operational aspects. The traffic separation schemes, which is like a corridor for the ships to move in and out in this area, already exist since 1968. So for us, it's very simple to actually put this in operation. What we need is the political will and the compromises for the countries in order for the ships to start sailing, starting with those that have been there running short on supplies and that need some evacuations, or seafarers that need some further assistance.
The U.S. has offered to do military escorts of some of these ships through the Strait. Do you think that would help or hinder this plan for a humanitarian corridor? Do you think that would make it harder for Iran to accept, or do you think that would make it easier to facilitate the evacuation of these ships?
One of the concerns that I keep repeating in relation to naval escorts on merchant ships is that it doesn't eliminate 100% the risk of a ship being targeted by a drone or a missile. And that would put the life of a seafarer at risk, something that we cannot accept. So what we're working on is in the operational aspects and the diplomacy. Also, we need to remember that the Strait of Hormuz is quite narrow. In the shortest area, it's around just over 30 kilometers wide. There needs to be very proper coordination and cooperation between any countries that will rely or will provide this kind of assistance. But it is not sustainable and it's not a long-term solution.
It also sounds to me like you're saying you think it's safer to have a diplomatic agreed to humanitarian corridor that Iran and other parties have signed on to rather than a military escort with the U.S.'s help.
Absolutely. It's for years, for decades, the Strait of Hormuz have been operating ships in and out without any issues. All the technical measures and operational measures have been in place for a while, and every single mariner knows what to do whenever they get to the Strait of Hormuz and how to trade in the region. What we need is to de-escalate, allow shipping to continue to operate as normal, and that is something that we can do through diplomacy and negotiations.
I also want to ask you about your communications with Iran. Are you speaking to them directly? Are you speaking to them through intermediaries? And are you speaking to the U.S. directly or through intermediaries?
I speak to all the member states of IMO, and of course that includes the United States and the Islamic Republic of Iran. They have permanent representations here in London, and I maintain contact, continuous conversations with them, face-to-face, remotely, you name it. The main task that I will carry out here is as well is maintain that role into bringing the parties together, having the conversations, finding the ways that we can agree on how to assist the vessels, because every single country at IMO repeated the same message. We should not be affecting negatively shipping because of these geopolitical situations. We need to respect freedom of navigation, and seafarers have to be protected and not to be used as collateral damage.
President Trump has said Iran let a tanker or two through. Is that accurate? Have you seen any kind of movement?
We are tracking movement around the Strait of Hormuz. Of course, before the conflict started, there was around, on average, 130 vessels that would pass every day. Right now, those numbers are very limited, from 2 to 5.
Yeah.
And there are some conversations between the Islamic Republic of Iran and other countries in order to get some agreements for some ships to actually sail through.
I also want to ask, we've talked about the humans on these ships, but there is also concern about some of the cargo on these ships, including fertilizer and other perishable goods. Some of it could become unstable and dangerous. Some of it could be rotting in these cargo holds. How big of a concern is that? And is that likely at this point? And what do you do about that?
Right now, those are the reasons why we always will need to have seafarers on board the vessels, because they can manage those situations and take any operational necessary action. But of course, the main concern continues to be the supplies. And once we actually have this evacuation corridor in place, then we can take on board all those concerns in relation to the cargoes that are on board and which are the first ships that need to sail through the Strait of Hormuz.